Coming up, Cam Thomas breaks his silence on his inability to get a long-term deal done with the Nets. I'll tell you why his Brooklyn departure could be coming sooner rather than later after this.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I'm Erik Slater, Brooklyn Nets beat reporter for ClutchPoints.com. Thank you for making me your first listen of the day. This show is 100% free on all those great platforms. And on today's show, I'm going to be reacting to Cam Thomas and Sean Marks' comments at Nets Media Day, which was earlier today at HSS Training Center in Brooklyn. I was there, got to ask Cam and Sean questions, and it was both of their first time speaking since Cam's decision to sign his one-year, $6 million qualifying offer, which was the culmination of a failed contract negotiation and the two sides' inability to agree to a long-term deal in restricted free agency. And my takeaway from Cam and Sean's comments was that it didn't change my stance on Cam Thomas not being a long-term piece for Brooklyn and him probably being traded this season. And look, Cam and Sean came in, they said all the politically correct things, which is great, but you really wouldn't expect them to say anything else. Definitely on Sean's end, this was, the biggest story entering media day. How is Cam Thomas going to respond to all of this? And he came in and he said all the right things. We said that he's happy to be back. He said they weren't able to come to an agreement, but that it's the business side of things. It's not personal, and that he's happy to be back playing in front of the fans and that he's going to give it his all early this season. But if you were to say anything other than that, that would really just be a negative for him and only work to hurt his market next summer. So he came and he said all those things, but there were comments from Cam Thomas that I thought were noteworthy, which did nothing to sway my opinion that he's not a fit for this Brooklyn regime and Sean Marks and what they are looking for. And I've documented numerous times why I think that's the case. I said, I've said actions speak louder than words. And in this case, I think we have actions and words that signal that Cam is not a fit for this Nets regime. The actions being that they were willing to squeeze him down in the contract offers to the point where he was willing to contemplate taking the $6 million qualifying offer, and he ultimately did, in which case the Nets lose control of him as an asset because he's going to be an unrestricted free agent next summer, also has a no-trade clause. So that's a bad outcome for the Nets from an asset retention standpoint, which tells me that retaining him as an asset, they don't think that he has that much value, as a trade piece or as a piece where, he's worthy of that $20 to $30 million a year contract extension that he reportedly wanted. But we got comments from Cam Thomas, and he was asked about the motivation behind his decision to take the qualifying offer. And he said that it was all about him retaining control of his destiny. This is the exact quote. You just want to keep that power that you have as a player as much as you can, as long as you can. So I think that was really the main deciding factor in me taking the qualifying offer. You want to keep that little bit of power that you have in that QO if you don't get the long-term deal that you want. So I think it was a good deal for me, and it works out both ways. I think it was fair enough for this year. And that, Cam Thomas being so intent on keeping control of his destiny as a player, I think is a signal that he knows that he's probably not going to be a long-term piece in Brooklyn, and the Nets were probably going to be shopping him. And I think that was reflected in the Nets offers to Cam. Nets offers to Cam, this is from Shams Charania, were reportedly a 2-year, $30 million deal with a team option in year 2, and then a 1-year, $9.5 million deal, which was essentially a bribe to get Cam to waive, his no trade clause. And Cam opted to sacrifice that $3.5 million to retain that no trade clause. And why would you do that? That's probably because you think that the Nets may be a team that's looking to shop you, and you want to have full control over what that Nets team is going to be. And you want to have that control next summer, in free agency, and you also want to have that control during the season. So that to me is a signal, flat out that Cam Thomas envisioned himself probably being a trade candidate, and he saw the writing on the wall for this Brooklyn team. And another noteworthy quote from Cam came from a question I asked him, and this dates back all the way to the end of last season when I asked Cam if he felt that he had done enough to secure a long-term place in Brooklyn. And he said, of course. And he said that he felt that when he's gotten minutes, that he's been one of the best players in the NBA in his position. And I pointed out, in this question at Media Day that Clearly, the Nets don't think that, and clearly, that they feel that he still has something to prove because they didn't give him, the offer that he wanted, and they were only willing to offer him the mid-level exception. So given that, I asked him if he feels that he has anything that he needs to reevaluate, if he feels that he needs to at all change the approach in his game in order to get that offer that he wants, that contract that he wants, whether from the Nets or from any other team next year in free agency. And Cam paused for a little bit, and he said no. Flat out said, no, I'm not going to change anything. I'm going to continue to play my game and approach the game the way that, he has been. And that's fine. But I think that more than anything is a signal that his Nets tenure is going to be coming to a close, because clearly the Nets haven't been over the moon about what they've seen from Cam Thomas. Otherwise, they would have offered him more than the mid-level exception. If they viewed him as that star player, in the ilk that he views himself, they would have offered him a deal, over $20 million. Like we just saw Josh Giddey, similar situation to Cam Thomas in restricted free agency. Not a lot of cap space teams around the league. The Bulls gave him a 4-year, $100 million deal to be their starting point guard for the foreseeable future. And the Nets were not willing to make anything even close to that commitment for Cam Thomas. And if Cam is saying that he's going to keep doing what he's doing and he's not going to change anything, why would the Nets stance on, what they're willing to pay him change? I don't think it will. And that's why ultimately I just don't think that this is a match, these two teams. And I ultimately think that this is probably going to come to a point in the early season where it is a trade, because, I just don't think that the two sides' goals are aligning. And Sean Marks, said all the right things. He said, because Cam Thomas is coming in to start this year, he said, I'm not going to close the door on Cam being a long-term piece. I don't want to jump to any conclusions. He said all that, but I think the door, frankly, is shut. And I just don't see this situation as being tenable. I think we have a long, list of comments and actions from Sean Marks and from this Brooklyn regime that signal that Cam Thomas just really isn't their guy. And they might value him, as a bench piece. They might value him around that 2-year, $30 million offer that they gave him. But in regards to Cam being a long-term beast, being a starter, getting that salary approaching, $30 million annually, what he thinks that he's worth, I just don't think that's coming from Brooklyn. And because of that, I think that Cam will probably want to get to a situation where he's going to be valued, and the Nets will probably want to see whatever value they can get for him on the trade market and probably try to work with his representation to get a deal done where they can move him. He won't hurt their tank, first of all. And then second of all, they can focus on the rookies and Kobe Buffkin and some of these other guards that they have in the door. And I think that ultimately will make sense for both sides. But how could this play out throughout this season? What could Cam's market look like next offseason? And will his QO gamble pay off? I'll touch on all that after the break. We got Mike Scotto from Hoops Hype joining the pod to chop it up about Cam and everything else Nets. So all that when it continue Locked On Nets after a quick break. But before that, want to tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Guys, FanDuel fits however you like to bet, player props, building a same-game parlay, or even jumping in live as the action unfolds. It makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. It's quick, easy, and the best way to add a little more energy to Sundays. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. Joining the pod now, we got Hoops Hype's Michael Scotto. And Scotto, it is media day at many stops across the NBA. We both just got back from HSS Training Center in Brooklyn, and the main topic of the day was Cam Thomas breaking his silence on his decision to accept his qualifying offer, and Sean Marks on the team's inability to agree to a contract extension with Cam. I did an intro touching on my thoughts. Just what was your main takeaway from the comments we got from Sean and also from Cam about how this situation played out this offseason?
A couple things stood out, Eric. I think first, I get Sean saying the phrase, that he didn't want to jump to any conclusions or have people jump to conclusions that just because they couldn't get a long-term deal or a multi-year deal done this summer, that it couldn't happen next summer. History would say otherwise. If you
where's the BS meter on that? The Scotto BS meter, is it off the charts, or are you buying that somewhat?
Is there technically truth to that? Yes, but like I said, big picture, you look at all the people that have gotten to qualifying offers, they don't usually stay. So I'm not banking on that. We've touched on this before on your Locked On Nets show, Eric. Actions speak louder than words. They could have done a deal for multiple years. They didn't. Brooklyn had only talked about a 2-year contract structure anyway. I get business is business, but at the end of the day, if the Nets felt that strongly about Cam Thomas, they could have locked him up now. That didn't happen. Cam Thomas said that he chose the control over his situation and looking ahead towards free agency. That's correct. He passed on a little bit of money to have unrestricted free agency at the end of the upcoming season, looking ahead towards the summer of 2026. I'm not sure how much better the market's going to be then, but time will tell. He's got a year to change the narrative.
Yeah, we'll talk about what we think the market can be, how we think Cam's going to approach this season. But what you said about the QO, like it's overwhelmingly, these guys almost always leave the following offseason. I think like Spencer Hawes, I think was the last player to sign a QO and then re-sign with his team. And that was like 2012 or 2013. And it was a very minuscule deal. Like since then, we just haven't seen it and it doesn't happen. And yeah, like Sean obviously is going to say, you know, the politically correct thing. He has to have Cam on the team at least to start this season. So he's not going to say like this guy has no future with the Nets. Cam also said that he's happy to be there and we'll see how it plays out. But, you know, I just don't really see a scenario where he's coming back because, you know, the Nets, if they're risking him taking this Q, I've said it in the past, like it's a bad outcome for them. You know, it's not, they lose leverage. They lose him as an asset. And also, I think like the offers, like what is your opinion on this? Because Cam said, as you said numerous times, that his main priority was keeping control, you know, of himself and where he can go as a player. And, you know, his you know, refusal to take some of the other offers that the Nets gave him, especially that 1-year, $9.5 million offer. So he basically sacrificed that $3.5 million to maintain his no trade clause. To me, I said this on my intro, pretty much a signal that he thinks the Nets are probably going to trade him or that there's a good chance that he could get traded. Like, is that your read on the situation? Because otherwise you would just take that extra money.
Yeah, I agree with your assessment on that and the way it looks like he's looking at it. You know, if I'm going into the year for the Nets, certainly he's one of the top trade candidates on paper, whether it's in combining him with another player to make a deal or not. But again, actions speak louder than words. They could have did a deal. They did not for multiple years, I should say. That to me signals all you need to know about the future. If the Nets felt that Cam Thomas was a core guy that they had to lock up long-term and that they saw enough, then it would have happened. Now, granted, I know Cam Thomas had an inflated sense of what he thought his value was and, you know, whether it was him, his camp, whoever you want to say. When you play only 25 games and you hurt your hamstring multiple times, Sean did allude to the fact, Sean Marks, that it gives him an opportunity to show that he can stay healthy and and have that same production that he had for a prolonged period of time. 25 game sample is not enough, Eric.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And it'll be interesting. Even if he stays healthy, I really don't think that the Nets are going to extend him. I mean, you look at like you said, if they wanted to, if they were going to risk him taking the QO and, you know, squeeze him down to that mark where that was really his best option in his eyes, I always thought that it was a signal that they weren't going to extend him. And they could have extended him at a deal that, you know, would have been lucrative, but not like breaking the bank or anything like that. Like you look at the Bulls and Josh Giddey. Giddey got 4 years, $100 million from Chicago. Yeah. And, you know, that sounds like a massive deal, but with the way that the cap's rising, like that's the going rate for a starting level player, like a good starting level player in the NBA now. And the Bulls gave Josh Giddey that. The Nets weren't even close to that. So what does that tell you about how they're valuing Cam?
Well, I'd say, you know, here's my response to that, Eric. I would say I asked Cam, like, well, how did you feel that Josh Giddey got that deal and you didn't? He said the situations are different. Okay, let's make it more comparable then to Jonathan Kuminga, team that drafted the player and is having a long negotiation stalemate. Kuminga's in somewhat of a similar situation where there's different offers, but they're 2 or 3 years, but for a lot more money. To your point, it never seemed like the Nets were really trying to ever get much more than a mid-level at best.
Yeah.
So now he's going into unrestricted free agency. Yeah, some teams have cap space, but predominantly a lot of the teams are going to have a non-taxpayer mid-level, which is about what the Nets were offering in some regards now, in some of those constructs that they proposed. And so I don't know how much more, if at all, he would get than that at this point. You would need a team with cap space to think that you're the missing piece. Too early to determine that right now. It's definitely a risk, but I understand why he did it in terms of having control of where he could go. I just don't know how much the money, if at all, is going to change.
Yeah, and I think that to him, whatever money he sacrificed, like he might come out. I've said, when my reaction pod when he took the QO, that I feel like this is going to cost him money in the short term, but he might feel that sacrifice is worth it to handpick his next destination and perceivably increase his market value and make up that money in the long term. And could that be true? That could be true, but I'm not sure that the market's going to be there. Like you look at, the way the NBA has approached these guards, these score first guard, this archetype this offseason, it's been a hard pivot away from these guys. And that obviously has a lot to do with the CBA, with all of this money, every dollar being so much more valuable than it was before because of these aprons, which are essentially a hard cap. And that's what, Sean Marks said. He said, Cam's camp is going to look out for him and we're going to look out for us and, maintain flexibility moving forward. And that seemed to be the priority. And if, not to beat a dead horse, but if the Nets thought that Cam was the right guy or a starting caliber guy, you'd have to think that they would have been willing to go above the mid-level, and they just weren't. But it's interesting to say, to think about what could be the market for Cam next offseason, and also how does he operate this season with the Nets, and what does he feel is the best way to ensure that he gets that deal that he wants. We'll touch on all that when we close out Locked On Nets after a quick break. Coming back from the break, closing out Locked On Nets, talking with Hoops Hype's Michael Scotto about Cam Thomas and Sean Marks' comments at Media Day. Cam Thomas accepting his one-year, $6 million qualifying offer. The two sides were unable to come to an agreement. And Scotto, something else that I thought was interesting. I asked Cam, does he feel that, based on how these negotiations went, based on the fact that he wasn't able to get the deal that he wanted from the Nets or from any other team, that, does he feel he needs to reevaluate the way that he's approaching the game? Does he feel that he needs to maybe change anything that he does on the court in order to secure that deal? He paused for a second, almost like giving me a little juke, and then he went, no. And then he went on to say that he's not going to change anything about how he plays and that this is, pretty much who he is. He's going to do what he does, and he thinks he's going to get paid, obviously. I've been, on the record since he took the QO that I'm not sure about that assessment. I'm not surprised at all that that's what he said. Like, Cam is who Cam is. He's a bucket getter. That's who he wants to be. And, you can't get a, what's the saying? You can't get a zebra to change its stripes or some shit like that.
You can't change the stripes on a leopard.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. There you go. So he's not going to change. But I've said, like, if Cam comes out this season and he does what he's done, like, say he's healthy, unlike last year, he's healthy, but he averages like 23 points a game, decent efficiency, still like not great assist numbers, and he's one of the worst defenders in the NBA. Is that going to get him paid? Like, I'm just not sure. Like, what's your take? I feel like there needs to be at least somewhat of an approach change to the way Cam's been playing, and it doesn't seem like that's in the cards or something that he's, acknowledging or even considering.
Eric, I would say in talking with executives around the league, the value of a two guard who's just a pure scorer, it's less than before. The Lou Williams, Jamal Crawfords are not getting paid this era. And so I would say that for him, it's got to be on a high efficiency. And I thought he shot decently last year. I did. But again, the sample size wasn't big enough. Cam Thomas needs to get over the hamstring woes that plagued him all of last year multiple times. Show that he could play a full season. I think if he does what he did and he averages, 20 plus, I think he was even at, it was 20, 22, somewhere around there.
23. It was around 23.
Shoots good efficiently from the field. And then you got a conversation. I think you're looking at, possibly you can get to the non-taxpayer mid-level. I just think, again, if you're going more than that, it's a tough sell because teams that are making cap space usually are doing that for a bigger fish. Or, they end up in trades. I never am a believer in looking at a year ahead of, oh, these teams have cap space. So many trades happen during the season. You got the December 15th, January 15th, because of CBA restrictions for certain players. Then you have the trade deadline. Then you go into the draft. Who's looking to take on salary, maybe to get picks and things like that. We clearly saw that with the Brooklyn Nets, helping to be a facilitator to try to get picks. So to me, I think that's going to be the interesting thing. Where does he land? I just don't know how much the market is going to change. Obviously, for him, it's. I know they could say, "Oh, everybody's mature about it, and he had a good head." And cap. Like, give me lids 7 5/8 cap. I know if I was in that spot, okay, and I didn't get a deal, I'd be pissed. Flat out.
He's definitely pissed. I mean, we know he's pissed. Like it goes.
When I asked him about getting it, he's like, "I'm not worried about that." You know, it's like,
yeah. Well, all right. Let me address something. Let me address something you said before, because this idea that all these teams are going to have cap space next summer and like that there's going to be several teams lining up to spend money on Cam Thomas. I think Cam is a really intriguing player. I think he has a lot of great things about his game. I would also say cap. I think that's definitely cap, because like Shams put it in the article when Cam took the QO, like 10 teams are projected to have cap space next summer and all that. And I'm like, okay, let's see how many teams are going to actually have that cap space when the season comes around. I mean, we've heard about this offseason is that, from people throughout the NBA, including yourself, who really know how this stuff works and are plugged in and talk to people, is how free agency is dead. Like free agency is pretty much a thing of the past. So why are all these teams?
If you're getting to free agency, it's almost viewed as a negative now.
Exactly. And that's my point. Like of those 10 teams that are projected to have cap space, we'll see how many of them actually have cap space when we go into the offseason next year. It'll be a small number, I'm sure. And of that small number, how many of them are, preserving that cap space to go and spend $20 to $30 million on Cam Thomas? Like, I just don't see it. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm being short-sighted, but I just don't see these teams that have cap space like that are going to be trying to get guys, I feel like, who are going to play a more, solidified and consistent role to being, in a playoff rotation than what Cam has proven thus far. So I'm just skeptical. Like, I think when I ask Cam that question, does he feel he needs to reevaluate anything? I think, a better response or more encouraging response to him getting paid will probably be like, yeah, like I think I can make some strides defensively. I think there's some things that I can improve there. I think like my engagement could improve. And we've never heard that from Cam, and he wants to be a scorer, and that's great. Like I think there's a role for Cam in the NBA. I just don't think that it's the role that he wants. And that's where I feel like the discrepancy is. Like I asked him about the Zach Lowe thing when he told Zach Lowe to go F himself, because Zach said that the consensus around the league from people he's spoken to is empty calories ball hog. And Cam said that he feels like that label has unfairly followed him. He feels like those people don't really watch the games. And I understand why it's frustrating, but I just don't feel like that label is just coming out of nowhere. Do I feel like it might be exaggerated too much and there might be a lack of appreciation for what he does as a scorer? Definitely at times, because I touched on that in my intro. But I feel like it's almost like this mentality that like people are out to get him, and like that these things that are said about him aren't true. And I just don't think that's the case.
Eric, I could tell you from talking to executives around the league that, there was a time maybe when like Jock Vaughn was coach and they weren't playing Cam Thomas. It's like, can you really use this guy? But then the guy has like back-to-back 40-point games. He's been a proven scorer. The narrative, I would say, objectively, has shifted to, on a playoff team, on a good team, Cam Thomas can be your spark plug off the bench and really help you with scoring off the bench. Is he a starter on a championship team? Executives around the league don't. Okay, now, I know he's had a decorated high school career. I know, when he was at LSU, he had a great career there in terms of scoring the ball. The narrative is placed on him because it's what executives who are the decision makers believe, fair or not. And at the end of the day, that's what you're dealing with. because those are the same people that he's banking on paying him in a year from now, or a little less than that, but you get my drift, in the summer of 2026. So to me, you said it spot on. Better defense. I think if Cam Thomas showed he was averaging 5 assists a game, would also change the narrative in that regard too. So, I did get a chuckle as I was sitting a few seats near you when you asked him about changing. He goes, no. I laughed because I didn't expect anything less.
Yeah, and honestly, that's part of what makes Cam great at the things that he's great at, is he has such self-confidence as a scorer and such belief in himself that is a very big positive in his game. But, it's a double-edged sword, I think. It can help him in some areas. It can hurt him in some areas. And, I'm not sure, the direction that it's trending with Cam. I think it's, trending towards a trade probably early in the season for me because, I will say, though, I think it was a positive for the Nets, the way that he conducted himself during this press conference, because he said all the right things in terms of being happy to be here. It didn't seem like there was too much of an attitude outside of just the things that, him speaking how he thinks the narrative about him is unfair. And that's a totally fair game. But in terms of being with the Nets, he said, I think 1,000 times, I'm happy to be here. He probably rehearsed it with his agent in front of the mirror 100 times before the press conference.
That's right. Coached him up on the PR side. Oh, yeah.
And I think, there were a lot of questions. One of the top questions I think we had going into this press conference was, is this going to be an untenable situation? And could it evolve into that? Sure. But for now,
not in the immediate future, because
Eric, for now, all right, go.
My prediction is he's going to have a high level usage the first 20, 25 games if he's still on the team at that point, because you're going to try to maximize him. And then if you are looking to trade him, you got to boost the stock. He's got to play. He's got to stay healthy and do what he does. And then you could look to flip. Usually around the first 20 games or so, 25, teams know what they are around the league. They have a good gauge and a good sample size, and they move from there. So if there's a playoff team out there, whether it's a GM maybe trying to save his job, or if a star is unhappy or something like that, and there's an urgency to win, maybe a team pulls a trigger on a guy like him. All remains to be seen. But my prediction, high usage the first 20-something games early, and see what the market dictates on the trade front.
My prediction is I think it could play out a lot similar, in a very similar way to what we saw with Dennis Schroeder last year, where Schroeder came out, he was on fire. That I don't think the Nets will win as many games as they did to start last year.
Schroeder said Cam Thomas was worth the max contract.
I know that's not aging too well. But Schroeder came out on fire. He helped the Nets win more games than they should have. I don't think they'll win that many to start this year. But then the Nets, December 15th, which you and I both know is the unofficial start of trade season in the NBA, he was shipped out the door. I think they announced a trade on 14th. The Nets were like, if they could trade him one day earlier, they would have done it. So Am I saying that Cam Thomas is going to get traded on December 15th? But I could see it playing out in a way where he comes out, he plays really well, and it gets to that point. There's a lot more, players that can be traded around the NBA, and we'll see how it plays out. But that's just my read on the situation. I think overall today, though, a lot of it was expected, but I think the biggest question was going to be, how does Cam Thomas conduct himself during this, press conference? And I think he said most of the right things in terms of, not, airing out any grievances and saying that he's going to be here and he's going to be committed. So we'll see how it plays out. Is there anything else you want to add on the Cam Thomas situation before we shut this down?
I just think with Cam, everything you thought was going to happen happened. Whether it was the QO, whether it was how he would respond to the answers, what Sean Marks would say. And at the end of the day, for the last time, actions speak louder than words.
I would agree with that assessment, and I think we'll see how it plays out. It's going to be an interesting story throughout the season. But Scotto, appreciate you taking the time as always. You're breaking news and then hopping right on Locked On Nets. We always appreciate that kind of commitment.
I appreciate you waiting for me to drop that Killian Hayes news before we came on.
Bomb. A Scotto bomb.
Always good to see you at the facility in the arena. look forward to seeing you soon. We got preseason coming up already. And, as the Joker would say, here we go.
That does it for today's episode of Locked On Nets. Hope you guys enjoyed the talk with Scotto about Cam Thomas and everything having to do with this situation. Will be interesting to see how that plays out. But if you guys do not already, make sure to subscribe to Locked On Nets on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, whether Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you enjoy the content right now, take 1 second. Smash that like button, leave a comment. Anything you guys can do to engage is much appreciated. We got the start of Nets practice tomorrow. I will be there this week and next at HSS Training Center, providing all that coverage. So I'll have all that and more here on Locked On Nets when I'm back tomorrow, talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.